Well, there you are. I'm glad you're here for another edition of Reading with Mr. Henry. Well, here we are, Act 5, the last act of Hamlet. Before we jump into Act 5, though, let's give a little context here. Let's review for a moment. Certainly, Claudius, King Claudius, who murdered his own brother, apparently, to take the throne, he's been growing in his paranoia over Hamlet. And most certainly the killing of Polonius, Hamlet's killing of Polonius in his mother's room has hastened Claudius to act and to do something about his Hamlet problem. And so he sends him to England, and he sends him with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, the dutiful courtiers, and yet we know that he's got plans for what should happen to Hamlet in England, and he intends to have England execute Hamlet. Okay. All of a sudden, though, Claudius learns that Hamlet is back, and in addition to that, Claudius has Laertes all up in his face demanding justice for his father, and Claudius sees an opportunity here. Hamlet is a problem for him. Laertes is like a loaded gun, and Claudius merely points the loaded gun, metaphorically speaking, toward Hamlet, and they come up with that plan, that devious plan to set up a fencing match between Hamlet and Laertes, and instead of using blunted swords, they're going to use a sharpened sword. And they add the possibility of poison on top of that, on the edge of the sword. And then Claudius comes up with, well, let's also put poison in his drink. And so they've got this three-layered plan to get rid of Hamlet. And yet, at the very end of Act 4, we get perhaps the most tragic news that Ophelia has died, that she's drowned. And that may be the heaviest scene in the play. And so to begin Act 5, perhaps a little bit of levity, a little bit of comic relief would relieve the audience in Shakespeare's day of such heavy news. Now, granted, what we're about to read, the subject matter is serious. It's even morose. But the characters that Hamlet encounters, although they are of low standing in society, they, especially one of them, trades barbs with Hamlet like no one else in the play has been able to. So let's turn to Act 5, Scene 1. I'm on page 327 in the Barnes & Noble edition. Act 5, Scene 1, and look, the stage directions. It says, enter two clowns as gravediggers. And we've got a side note. Let's read this because this is not literal clowns. On the side it says, the two clowns, a word that could mean peasants as well as jesters, and also was used to identify the primary comic actors in the troupe. The two clowns are arguing in a mix of rustic dialect, a good deal lower in social register than the rest of the talk in the play. And they're talking in mangled legalese, legal language, which then, as now, included a fair amount of Latin. Hamlet, a gifted mimic, picks up some of their language and recognizes the gravedigger's absolute or precise wit. And so, enter two clowns as gravediggers, and the first clown says, is she to be buried in Christian burial when she willfully seeks out her own salvation? And we've got to look at some side notes here. Side note 2, it says, according to the church law, those who die by suicide are to be denied full Christian funeral rites, which include burial in a consecrated ground. And when he says, when she willfully seeks her own salvation, that's probably a mistake of his, meaning damnation. He misspoke. The second clown answers. He says, I tell thee she is. Therefore make her grave straight. The crowner hath sat on her and finds it Christian burial. Well, how can that be, unless she drowned herself in her own defense? Why, 'tis found so. Well, it must be se offendendo. And look at the side note with me, side note number 5. This is the reading of the folio, and the folio probably represents the gravedigger's ignorant error for se defendendo, which is the Latin term for self-defense. So the first clown says, it must be se offendendo. It cannot be else. For here lies the point. If I drown myself wittingly, it argues an act, and an act hath 3 branches. It is to act, to do, to perform. Argal, she drowned herself wittingly. And he mangles the Latin word ergo, of pronouncing it argal. So he's making a case that Ophelia may have willingly taken her own life. The second clown says, nay, but hear you, Goodman Delver. Now, give me leave. Here lies the water. Good. Here stands a man. Good. If the man go to this water and drown himself, it is willy-nilly he goes. Mark you that. But if the water come to him and drown him, he drowns not himself. Argal, he that is not guilty of his own death shortens not his own life. But is this law? Aye, merriest, Crowner's Quest law. Who builds stronger than the mason? Sorry, I skipped a page. Pardon me. Well, you have the truth on it. If this had not been a gentlewoman, she should have been buried out of Christian burial. Why, there thou sayest. And the more pity that great folk should have countenance or permission in this world to drown or hang themselves more than they're even Christian. Come, my spade. There is no ancient gentleman but gardeners, ditchers, and gravemakers. They hold up Adam's profession. Was he a gentleman? He was the first ever to bore arms. I'll put another question to thee. If thou answerest me not to the purpose, confess thyself. Go to. The first clown says, what is he that builds stronger than either the mason, the shipwright, or the carpenter? Oh, the gallows maker, for that outlives 1,000 tenants. Oh, I like thy wit well, in good faith. The gallows does well. But how does it well? It does well to those who do ill. Now thou dost ill to say the gallows is built stronger than the church. Argal, the gallows may do well to thee. To it again. Come, in other words, answer my question. Try again. Second clown says, who builds stronger than a mason, a shipwright, or a carpenter? Aye, tell me that, and unyoke. Well, marry, now I can tell. To it. Mass, I cannot tell. Cudgel thy brains no more about it, for your dull ass will not mend his pace with beating. And when you are asked this question next, say, a grave maker. The houses he makes last till doomsday. Now go, get thee in and fetch me a stoop of liquor. And the second clown exits. In youth, when I did love, methought it was very sweet to contract, the time for, my behove. Oh, methought there was nothing meet. And enter Hamlet and Horatio off to the side of the stage. Has this fellow no feeling of his business? He sings in grave making. Custom hath made it in him a property of easiness. Side note 4. Habit has made digging graves a matter of complete comfort. Okay? Hamlet adds, 'tis e'en so. The hand of little employment hath the daintier sense. Side note 5. The hand that is not frequently used, in other words, without calluses, has the sharper sense of touch. Makes sense. First clown continues singing. But age with his stealing steps hath clawed me in his clutch, and hath shipped me into the land as if I had never been such. And he tosses up a skull out of the grave. Hamlet sees it and says, "That skull had a tongue in it and could sing once." How the knave jowls it to the ground as if it were Cain's. Side note, Cain was the son of Adam who killed his brother Abel. As if it were Cain's jawbone that did the first murder. Now, this might be the pate of a politician, which this ass now o'erreaches, one that would circumvent God, might it not? Oh, Horatio agrees. He says it might, my lord. Or it could be a courtier, which could say, "Good morrow, sweet lord, how dost thou, sweet lord?" Well, this might be, my lord, such a one that praised my lord such a one's horse when I went to beg it, might it not? Aye, my lord. And Hamlet goes on about this skull that the gravedigger has thrown up. He says, "Why, even so. And now my lady worms, chapless and knocked about the mazzard with a sexton's spade." Here's fine revolution, and we had the trick to see it. Did these bones cost no more the breeding but to play at loggets with them? Look at side note 5. Was the value of raising these people, who are now dead, of course, so little that their bones can now be used as loggets, little sticks that are thrown at a stake in some game? In other words, Hamlet is noting the seriousness of this, contrasting it with the clown's, rather kind of a flippant attitude. Again, and he says, "Mine ache to think on it." And the first clown continues his song, "A pickaxe and a spade, for and a shrouding sheet. Oh, a pit of clay for to be made, for such a guest is meet." And he tosses up another skull, and Hamlet says, "There's another. Why, may not that be the skull of a lawyer? Where be his quiddities, now his quilities, his cases, his tenures, and his tricks? Why does he suffer this mad knave now to knock him about the sconce with a dirty shovel, and will not tell him of his action of battery?" Side note, his prosecution for assault. It's okay, so it could be a lawyer's skull. This fellow might be in time a great buyer of land, with his statutes, his recognizances, his fines, his double vouchers, his recoveries. And look, all of those that's just a list of sort of legal financial terms. Hamlet's wondering about the lives of these people whose skulls now get thrown around like they're nothing. To have his fine pate full of fine dirt? Will vouchers vouch him no more of his purchases and doubles than the length and breadth of a pair of indentures? And look at side note 3 with me. A pair of indentures is a legal document written on one large piece of parchment, which was then torn in half irregularly. Each party then took one piece, and when the document was needed again, the segments could be fit together to prove that they both belonged to the same original. And so he's wondering all the financial and legal wranglings of this man's life, and they don't do much for him now. To finish that little speech, it says, "The very conveyances of his lands will scarcely lie in this box, and must the inheritor himself have no more, huh?" Horatio agrees. He says, "Not a jot more, my lord." "Is not parchment made of sheepskins?" "Aye, my lord, and of calfskins too." Well, they are sheep and calves. Side note 5. Fools, okay. They are sheep and calves, which seek out assurance in that. I will speak to this fellow. "Whose grave's this, sirrah?" "Mine, sir." He keeps singing. "Oh, a pit of clay for to be made. I think it be thine indeed, for thou liest in it." "You lie out on it, sir, and therefore 'tis not yours. For my part, I do not lie in it, and yet it is mine." "No, thou dost lie in it. To be in it and say it is thine, 'tis for the dead, not for the quick. Therefore thou liest." "'Tis a quick lie, sir. 'Twill away again from me to you." "What man dost thou dig it for?" "For no man, sir." Okay, what woman then?" "For none neither." "Who is to be buried in it?"
Well, one that was a woman, sir, but rest her soul, she's dead.
How absolute the knave is. We must speak by the card,
Precisely.
or equivocation will undo us. By the Lord, Horatio, this 3 years I have took a note of it. The age is grown so picked. Side note. The age has grown so refined, so fastidious or affected. The age has grown so picked that the toe of the peasant comes so near the heel of the courtier he galls his kibe.
He does what?
Side note 3. Oh, he irritates his heel sore. In other words, the peasant follows so closely to the courtier that there is no distinction between the two of them. He's just commenting on his current society. And then he asks the gravedigger, "How long hast thou been gravemaker?"
Well, of the days of the year, I came to it that day that our last King Hamlet overcame Fortinbras.
Oh, how long is that since? And you can imagine that at this point, the gravedigger has no idea who he's talking to. Hamlet, of course, is going to kind of play dumb just to see what he can make of this. And Hamlet asks, "How long is that since?"
Huh. Cannot you tell that? Every fool can tell that. It was that very day that young Hamlet was born, he that is mad, and sent into England.
Hi, Mary, why was he sent into England?
Why, because he was mad. I shall recover his wits there, or, if I do not, 'tis no great matter there.
Why?
'Twill not be seen in him there. There the men are as mad as he.
How came he mad?
Very strangely, they say.
Well, how strangely?
Faith, e'en with losing his wits.
Now, upon what ground? In other words, Hamlet's asking, for what reason did he go mad? And, of course, he takes it literally. He says,
"Why, here in Denmark. I have been sexton here, man and boy, 30 years.
Now, stop. We've run into a problem. Read side note 2 with me, and it describes the problem. This establishes that Hamlet is 36 years old, since the sexton began his job that very day that young Hamlet was born. Many critics have been troubled by assigning this age to a man who had just returned from the midst of his studies at Wittenberg, and who is so many times described in the play as young. Explanations for this have included an accommodation to the age of the lead actor of Shakespeare's company, Richard Burbage. In other words, Burbage was an older actor. Maybe Shakespeare was trying to accommodate that. I'm not convinced of that. It may also be that we should simply relax our expectations of strict realism here. Hamlet seems older and wiser in Act 5, but we need not and should not read that back into his previous acts. Listen, we have a hard time explaining the Hamlet age problem. The Hamlet age problem. I think that Hamlet is somewhat older. He does seem wiser than perhaps a 22-year-old might have. And it may very well be that William Shakespeare just lost track of ages in the midst of writing this play. We go on. Hamlet asks the gravemaker a question. "How long will a man lie in the earth ere he rot?"
"Faith, if a be not rotten before a die, as we have many pocky corpses that will scarce hold the laying in."
Side note 3. Since we have many corpses that are already rotten with syphilis, which can hardly stay intact during their burial.
"He'll last you some 8 or 9 year. A tanner will last you 9 year."
"Well, why he more than another?"
"Why, sir, his hide is so tanned with his trade that it will keep out water a great while, and your water is a sore decayer of your whoreson dead body."
And he picks up a skull.
Here's a skull now. That hath lain you in the earth 23 years.
Whose was it?
A whoreson mad fellow's it was. Whose do you think it was? Nay, I know not. Ah, pestilence on him for a mad rogue. A poured a flagon of Rhenish on my head once. This same skull, sir, was Sir Yorick's skull, the king's jester. And some playwrights have the gravemaker toss the skull to Hamlet. Hamlet's got the skull now, and he's looking at it, and he's like, this? And he goes, yep, even that. Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio. A fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times, and now, how abhorred in my imagination it is. My gorge rises at it. Here hung those lips that I have kissed I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now, your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment that were wont to set a table on a roar? Not one now to mock your own grinning? Oh, quite chapfallen. Now get you to my lady's table and tell her, let her paint an inch thick, to this favor she must come. Side note 3. Even if she were to put on an inch of makeup on her face, she will someday come to look like this. Make her laugh at that. Prithee, Horatio, tell me one thing. What's that, my lord? Dost thou... Now, stop there for a second. It's got to be strange for Hamlet. He's holding the skull of someone he knew. Someone he knew back in his childhood. It's got to be. That would be an odd feeling. I mean, imagine, 50 years from now, and, you're out in the graveyard like Hamlet. Someone tosses you a skull, and they're like, there's a skull for you. That was Mr. Henry's skull. And you look at the skull and you go, wow, I knew him, Horatio. He was a bit of an ass, but he was an all right fellow. I mean, that would be odd. It would be so odd. And it causes Hamlet to kind of sink into a kind of meditation on death. And he was already there, just looking at the gravedigger burying or digging a grave. And so he says, prithee, Horatio, tell me one thing. What's that, my lord? Dost thou think Alexander looked o' this fashion in the earth? And of course he's referring to Alexander the Great. Horatio says, yeah, even so. And he smelt so? Pah! Even so, my lord. To what base uses we may return, Horatio? Why may not imagination trace the noble dust of Alexander till he find it stopping a bunghole? Side note for that reference. A spout in a cask or barrel. Hamlet contends that even the remains of a great man like Alexander, being mixed with the earth after burial, will eventually resurface in an ignoble new form. In other words, even the greatest of men becomes nothing more than just dirt. And Horatio says, 'twere to consider too curiously to consider so. No, faith, not a jot. But to follow him thither with modesty enough and likelihood to lead it. Alexander died. Alexander was buried. Alexander returneth to dust. The dust is earth, and of earth we make loam. Side note 3, a mixture of sand, clay, and straw, often used as a mortar or a plaster. Okay. And why of that loam, whereto he was converted, might they not stop a beer barrel? Imperious Caesar, dead and turned to clay, might stop a hole to keep the wind away. Oh, that the earth which kept the world in awe should patch a wall to expel the winter's flaw. Oh, but soft a while. And at that, because he's telling Horatio to be quiet, he hears a procession coming, including Claudius and Gertrude Laertes, a priest, and a corpse. And he says to Horatio, here comes the king, the queen, courtiers. Who is this they follow, and with such maimed rites? This doth betoken the corpse they followed did with desperate hand fordo its own life. 'Twas of some estate. Couch we a while and mark. In other words, let's sit here and let's watch. And so they step to the back as to be not seen. And we hear Laertes say, "What ceremony else?" And Hamlet to Horatio says, "That's Laertes, a very noble youth. Mark. What ceremony else?" "Her obsequies," this is the priest, "have been as far enlarged as we have warranty." Side note, official sanction. In other words, we're going as far as we can to give her a proper burial. It says, "Her death was doubtful, and but that great command o'ersways the order, she should in ground unsanctified been lodged till that last trumpet. For charitable prayers, shards, flints, and pebbles should be thrown on her. Yet here she is, allowed with virgin krantz." Side note 7, garlands of flowers designed for a young woman. "Her maiden struments, and the bringing home of bell and burial." Side note 8, the bringing of her body to its grave accompanied by the normal funeral rites and ringing bells. But Laertes is not satisfied. He says, "Must there be no more be done?" "No more be done. We should profane the service of the dead to sing a requiem and such rest to her as to peace-parted souls. Lay her in the earth, and from her fair and unpolluted flesh may violets spring. I tell thee, churlish priest, a ministering angel shall my sister be when thou liest howling." And it's at this moment that Hamlet realizes who's being buried. "What? The fair Ophelia?" Gertrude says, "Sweets to the sweet," as she lays down flowers. "Farewell. I hope thou shouldest have been my Hamlet's wife. I thought thy bride bed to have decked, sweet maid, and not have strewed thy grave. Oh, treble woe fall 10 times double on that cursed head, whose wicked deed thy most ingenuous sense deprived thee of. Hold off the earth a while, till I have caught her once more in mine arms." And Laertes jumps into the grave of his sister. "Now, pile your dust upon the quick and the dead, till of this flat a mountain you have made, to o'ertop o'er Pelion, or the skyish head of blue Olympus." And Hamlet can't handle it. He steps forward, allows himself to be seen, and says, "What is he whose grief bears such an emphasis, whose phrase of sorrow conjures the wandering stars and makes them stand like wonder-wounded hearers? This is I, Hamlet the Dane." And the two of them begin to fight at Ophelia's funeral. It doesn't get more absurd than this in a way. And they're fighting, and it causes tumult and uproar and confusion. Everybody thought Hamlet was gone. And Laertes turns to Hamlet during the fight and says, "The devil take thy soul." And he says, "Thou prayest not well. I prithee take thy fingers from my throat. For though I am not splentive and rash, yet I have in me something dangerous, which let thy wisdom fear. Hold off thy hand." And the crowd is yelling. Claudius the king yells out, "Pluck them asunder." Gertrude's saying, "Hamlet, Hamlet." And everyone's going, "Gentlemen, good my lord, be quiet." And so Horatio's trying to stop his friend. And Hamlet says, "Why, I will fight with him upon this theme until my eyelids will no longer wag." And Gertrude says, "Oh, my son, what theme?" "I loved Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not with all their quantity of love make up my sum. What wilt thou do for her?" "Oh, he's mad, Laertes." "For the love of God, forbear him." In other words, be patient with him. Gertrude's taking up for her son. "Swoons, show me what thou'lt do. Wilt weep? Wilt fight? Wilt fast? Would tear thyself? Would drink up easel? Eat a crocodile? I'll do it. Dost come here to whine, to outface me with leaping in her grave? Be buried quick with her, and so will I. And if thou prate of mountains, let them throw millions of acres upon us, till our ground singeing his pate against the burning zone make Asa like a wart. Ooh, we better read a side note for that. Till the mound of earth piled on top of us, burning its peak as it nears the sun, makes Mount Asa look like a wart by comparison. He's trying to outdo Horatio. And he finishes with, nay, and thou'lt mouth, I'll rant as well as thou. And Gertrude, she's trying to explain her son's behavior, and she says, this is mere madness, and this a while the fit will work on him, anon as patient as the female dove, when that her golden couplets are disclosed, his silence will sit drooping. Side note too, soon he will sit in exhausted silence, as quiet as the female dove who has just hatched her yellow chicks. Hamlet, to Laertes, he says, hear you, sir. What is the reason that you use me thus? I loved you ever. But it is no matter. Let Hercules himself do what he may. The cat will mew, and dog will have his day. Whoa, we better read the side note. Hamlet says, let Hercules, a Greek hero renowned for his supernatural strength, let Hercules do whatever he can. Nature will take its usual course, and my time will come. Ooh, that sounds rather threatening from Hamlet. And Hamlet runs off. Claudius says, I pray you, good Horatio, wait upon him. In other words, go and attend to him. And then to Laertes, Claudius pulls him aside and says, strengthen your patience in our last night's speech. Remember, they had talked about their plan the night before. And he says, strengthen your patience in our last night's speech. We'll put the matter to the present rush. Good Gertrude, set some watch over your son. No, this grave shall have a living monument. An hour of quiet thereby shall we see, till then in patience our proceeding be. And the scene ends there. Claudius has his plan, and now that Hamlet has so abruptly entered the kingdom again, Claudius wants to set his plan in motion immediately. And that sets us up for Act 5, Scene 2, the last scene of the play, in which Shakespeare brings all these loose ends together in a triumphant kind of way, and of course in a tragic way as well. I'm glad you joined me today. I hope you guys have a good afternoon.